Now, the issue of hijacked and rundown buildings is back on focus following the death of 73 people in Johannesburg. Now, for more on this, I'm joined by Zolile Shude, who is an attorney candidate at the Socio-Economic Rights Institute of South Africa. A very good morning, or perhaps a good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your time. Perhaps let me start off with getting your reaction, as we learn that 73 lives have been lost, and it's expected that the death toll will rise.
A good day, although I'm not sure it's so much of a good day, given that we have learned that 73 people have lost their lives in that tragic incident in the building in the inner city of Johannesburg. And I would like to start off by, passing my condolences to all the families that have lost loved ones. It is a tragic incident that we wish would have not happened in these circumstances.
Yeah. Throughout the course of the morning, as Newzroom Afrika reporters and news anchors have been interacting with government officials, the issue of accountability comes to the forefront. And your name, Seri, has come up so much during the course of this morning. You've been blamed for blocking evictions from hijacked buildings. As the questions now continue to be asked about who is to blame, could this have been prevented? What do you have to say to that?
You know, we find ourselves in a very unfortunate position as citizens and NGOs in South Africa, because we are led by a political elite that lacks accountability. And I am saddened by the fact that I have to come on national television and pinpoint fingers on who is to blame for the tragic incident that happened at the Usindiso shelter for women and children. However, I do want to state for the record that that building belongs to the city of Johannesburg. It is a shelter that was leased by the city of Johannesburg for women and children in destitute. It is a building that was abandoned by the city of Johannesburg. They did not maintain the building. They did not upkeep the building, as they do with many buildings that belong to them. And when something like this happens, they blame it on NGOs that are merely trying to make sure that due process is followed in eviction proceedings and that the law is upheld. It is clear from Section 26 of the Constitution, from the PI Act and the housing jurisprudence developed by our courts, all the way to the Constitutional Court, that you do not conduct evictions willy-nilly. You can't evict people into homelessness. It is against our law to merely evict people without providing an alternative of where they will be housed. So it is more egregious to the rights of the citizens when a government entity like the city of Johannesburg, that has a constitutional obligation to provide alternative accommodation, wants us to sit back and watch them evict people into the street and hope that those people disappear into thin air. Unfortunately, that's not what the law says. That's not how the law says they must conduct evictions, and they know this. So it is unfounded and unwarranted, and they are just trying to find someone to blame for their own incompetence and the fact that they want to do things outside of the law. All Seri ever does is to defend homeless people in eviction proceedings and say, you can't evict them into homelessness. So if you want to evict them from their homes, you must make provision for alternative accommodation. This is the case even in evictions instituted by private persons. The city is still brought into those eviction proceedings to provide alternative accommodation because they have a constitutional duty. So it is totally unfounded. It is totally unwarranted that especially the MMC for Public Safety is pointing his fingers at Seri as if Seri is the reason why 73 people lost their lives.
Are you saying that the city has consistently failed to make provision for alternative accommodation with each attempt to evict people in unsafe, dark and buildings with no water or proper sanitation?
Exactly. The city comes and conducts evictions as if they do not have a constitutional obligation to provide those people with alternative housing. They want to come into these buildings for political sensationalization and scoring political points for the media, especially towards elections. They do this all the time, right? And they evict people without making provision of alternative accommodation. They've not only consistently failed to provide alternative accommodation in eviction proceedings, they've also failed to maintain the ones that they've been able to provide. We've got temporary alternative accommodations and shelters that are in the care of the city that have not been maintained, that are in dilapidated state. I can mention to you Ekutuleni from the famous constitutional case of Dladla following that Blue Moonlight eviction. That TEA has not been maintained by the city. In MBV1, an eviction from 2007, building in the care of the city, it is in dilapidated state. So they have not only failed to provide alternative accommodation when they are called to in litigation, but also when they eventually are able to provide alternative accommodation, they just turn their backs on those buildings and not maintain them.
What about the issue of crime? Because that also has come up during the course of this morning, where a lot of the residents are really fearful when it comes to their safety and criminal elements within and without and outside the building. How are those processes conducted? Because officials have also spoken to not being given full authority to conduct these raids, without evidence. I thought I heard, some of the narratives being played here is conducting a raid without evidence, but the way in which the community feels and the evidence that has been collected from other buildings, does that also not warrant these raids to happen should there be suspicions of criminal elements within the buildings?
I mean, these buildings, I must start by saying they are abandoned and people seek refuge for housing because they cannot afford housing anywhere else within the city of Joburg. So, of course, criminal elements can happen in these buildings, but you have a police service, you have a police service in the state that is responsible for policing, the Republic, the citizens, not only of Joburg, but the citizens of South Africa. However, there is law in how that is done, right? The state can't just conduct warrantless searches in people's homes. And what we see is that municipalities like the city of Joburg like doing these warrantless searches in people's home. They target poor people most of the time. They target people who are in these abandoned buildings because they are the easy target and they're poor. And so they don't have a voice and can't say anything else, right? But there is a constitutional case, Residents of Industry House, where the Constitutional Court says you do not have a right to conduct warrantless searches, save where you are looking for an instrument that is suspected in the commission of a crime, and you searching for going to seek a warrant will delay the process, right? So that's what they want to do. That's what Mr. Kenny Kunene was doing. He was raiding buildings without a warrant, going into people's homes, violating their rights against or in contravention of that principle established by the Constitutional Court. And that cannot be allowed because South Africa is not a lawless state, right? They like saying this. Mr. MMC Mchwaku likes saying that he's trying to enforce the laws, but you can't choose which laws to uphold and which laws to ignore. Right? Because there are laws for everything that we do in this country that stem from the Constitution and its principles.
Yeah, very well. Thank you so much. Let's perhaps leave it there for now. Seri candidate attorney Zolile Shude weighing in there as a lot of the blame has been pointed to the Socio-Economic Rights Institute of South Africa.